There's a number that sits at the center of the 2026 Iran war that neither side publicly discusses in its full weight. It has been mentioned in passing, referenced in classified briefings, acknowledged in fragments by officials who immediately move on to other subjects. But the implications of that number, what it means for the war being fought right now, what it means for what could come after, have not been stated plainly in any official statement from any government involved in this conflict. The number is 400, as in 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, as in the stockpile Iran had accumulated before Operation Epic Fury began, as in the material that the IAEA confirmed existed, that the U.S. intelligence community confirmed existed, that the Trump administration cited as part of its justification for launching the war, and that, as of the most recent available intelligence assessment, has not been destroyed, has not been retrieved, and is not at a location that anyone outside Iran's nuclear establishment can confirm. In June 2025, during Operation Midnight Hammer, the United States dropped 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance. Penetrators on Fordo and Natanz, Iran's enrichment capabilities were, by Trump's own description, obliterated. A preliminary Defense Intelligence Agency assessment, subsequently leaked to the press, suggested the strikes had set back Iran's ability to produce nuclear weapons by months rather than years. The CIA director disputed the assessment. The enrichment infrastructure was damaged or destroyed. But the enriched uranium that had already been produced, the 441 kilograms at 60% that the IAEA had documented as of June 2025, was not at the enrichment facilities when the bombs fell. Iran had moved it. This is not a contested claim. Multiple officials from the Trump administration and multiple independent nuclear analysts have confirmed that Iran's enriched uranium stockpile was dispersed before the June 2025 strikes and likely dispersed again before February 28, 2026. The Center for Strategic and International Studies noted in March 2026 that Iran still possesses 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, and the exact location of that nuclear material remains unknown. Unknown, in a war whose stated primary objective is to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons. That is where the nuclear dimension of this conflict begins, not with a warhead, not with a missile, with 400 kilograms of material in unknown locations that the people fighting the war cannot find, cannot destroy, and cannot retrieve, while simultaneously claiming the war is preventing Iran from having nuclear weapons. What 400 kilograms actually means. The physics of nuclear weapons design involves two critical thresholds. The first is enrichment level. Weapons-grade uranium requires enrichment to 90% or above. Iran's 60% material is not weapons-grade. The step from 60% to 90% is technically significant, but far shorter than the step from natural uranium to 60%, which Iran has already completed. The second threshold is quantity. A gun-type nuclear weapon, the simpler design, requires approximately 50 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. An implosion device, the more efficient design, requires approximately 15 kilograms. Iran has 400 kilograms of 60% material. If that material were further enriched to 90%, accounting for the roughly 25 to 30% yield reduction in the conversion process, Iran would have enough fissile material for approximately 8 to 10 gun-type devices, or more implosion devices. The Trump administration's Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said on February 21st, 1 week before the war began, that Iran was probably a week away from having industrial-grade bomb-making material. Nuclear experts immediately challenged the timeline as compressed and politically framed. Jeffrey Lewis of the Middlebury Institute told Scientific American there was no evidence that Iran was close to a nuclear weapon. FactCheck.org, PolitiFact, and the Congressional Research Service all documented significant gaps between the administration's public claims about Iran's nuclear immediacy and the available intelligence. But here's the uncomfortable truth that exists between the administration's overstatements and the expert community's corrections. The 400 kilograms is real. The enrichment capacity to convert it was real before the strikes began. The knowledge to complete the weaponization process, the implosion lens design, the initiator, the delivery system integration, is resident in Iranian engineering institutions that bombs cannot fully destroy. Iran's nuclear program is not a set of buildings. It is a body of knowledge distributed across thousands of engineers, scientists, and technicians, some of whom died in June 2025 when Israeli strikes killed 14 nuclear scientists, and most of whom did not. Destroying the facilities slows the program. It does not eliminate the capability. The Centers for Strategics and international studies concluded that, unlike the 1981 Israeli strike on Iraq's Osai Iraq reactor, which effectively ended a nascent program, Iran's program in 2026 is a mature, decentralized network that likely remains somewhat intact and more difficult to monitor. This is the nuclear reality that the war has not resolved. It has disrupted, degraded, and dispersed. Iran's nuclear infrastructure. It has not eliminated Iran's nuclear knowledge, Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, or Iran's underlying motivation to protect itself with the ultimate deterrent. The Dimona threat and what it reveals on February 28, 2026, the day the war began. An Iranian official publicly threatened to strike Israel's Dimona reactor complex if the United States and Israel pushed for regime change. This was not a casual statement. It was a deliberate signal directed at the specific facility where Israel is widely assessed to produce the fissile material for its undeclared nuclear arsenal. Dimona is located in the Negev desert. It is not a power reactor. It is a plutonium production reactor and reprocessing facility, the industrial complex where Israel has produced the material for what is estimated to be between 90 and 400 nuclear warheads. Israel neither confirms nor denies the existence of those warheads. The policy of strategic ambiguity has governed Israeli nuclear posture since the 1960s. An Iranian strike on Dimona would not produce a nuclear explosion. Nuclear reactors do not explode like nuclear bombs, but a successful strike on the Dimona facility could disperse radioactive material across a heavily populated region. The Arms Control Association's analysis of this scenario described significant radiological risks to surrounding populations. Past modeling of a strike on Dimona has estimated casualties in the hundreds of thousands from radiation exposure, displacement, and long-term contamination. It would not be a nuclear attack, but it would be an attack on a nuclear facility, with consequences that could kill as many people as some smaller nuclear weapons. Iran knows this. The threat was not made carelessly. It was made the day the war began, at maximum escalation pressure, as a signal that Iran has the capacity to cross a threshold that changes the character of the conflict, even without Iran possessing a single nuclear warhead. Whether Iran can actually hit Dimona with sufficient precision to achieve this effect, given the degradation of its ballistic missile inventory, is a separate question. But the threat reveals the logic chain that Iranian military planners are working with. If this becomes a war of regime change, the costs of that war will not be limited to Iranian territory and Iranian casualties. The NPT exit threat and what it means for the future. Following the 2025 12-day war's ceasefire, Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi and other officials signaled that Iran might cease complying with the nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. An Iranian official warned that Iran could withdraw from the NPT entirely if external threats persisted. Senior advisor Kamal Karazi stated that Iran has the technical capacity to build nuclear weapons, and that this stance could change if the country's existence were threatened. The 2026 war represents exactly the existential threat those statements were referencing. Supreme Leader Khamenei was killed. The stated U.S. objective includes regime change. Iran is fighting a war it did not choose and cannot conventionally win. Under these conditions, the NPT constraint, the legal diplomatic framework, that had kept Iran technically within the bounds of civilian nuclear activity, becomes the negotiating chip, not the firewall. An Iran that formally withdraws from the NPT, expels IAEA inspectors, and declares that its existential security requires nuclear weapons is a different strategic problem from the one Operation Epic Fury was launched to solve. It transforms what was a country approaching nuclear capability into a country explicitly pursuing it, without the diplomatic infrastructure of inspections, safeguards, and international monitoring that at least provided visibility into what was happening. The IAEA lost access to Iranian nuclear sites when the war began. As of March 2026, inspectors cannot visit any of the facilities they were monitoring. The monitoring that provided the world's most reliable window into Iran's nuclear activities has been closed by the same conflict that was supposed to eliminate Iran's nuclear ambitions. LSE's analysis of the conflict's nuclear dimension identified the central paradox. U.S. strikes may have turned Iran from a state with latent nuclear capability into one with a nuclear grievance. A nuclear grievance is not the same as a nuclear weapon, but a state with both the technical capacity and the existential motivation to produce one, operating in the absence of international inspection, is a more dangerous proliferation situation than the one that existed before the war began. Israel's undeclared arsenal and the Samson option. Israel's nuclear weapons are the fact that neither Israel nor the United States discusses in the context of this conflict, but that Iran has referenced repeatedly as the asymmetry that defines its security dilemma. Israel is assessed by the Arms Control Association, the Federation of American Scientists, and virtually every independent nuclear analyst to possess between 90 and 400 nuclear warheads, enough to destroy every major city in the Middle East multiple times over. These weapons exist. Their delivery systems, Jericho ballistic missiles, F-35I aircraft, submarine-launched cruise missiles exist. The Palmachim test facility where these systems were developed and continue to be tested exists. Israel has never tested a nuclear weapon publicly. It has never confirmed or denied possession. It has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It has never submitted to IAEA inspection of its nuclear facilities. This is not oversight. It is the deliberate construction of a strategic ambiguity that provides deterrence without the legal and political obligations that acknowledged nuclear status would impose. The Israeli nuclear doctrine that most analysts believe underpins this ambiguity is sometimes called the Samson option. The posture that if Israel faces an existential threat to its survival, the kind of attack that could destroy the state itself, it retains the option to use nuclear weapons as a last resort, ensuring that any actor that destroys Israel does not survive that act either. This doctrine has never been officially confirmed by Israel. It has also never been denied. It exists as the background radiation of every calculation every regional actor makes about the costs of pushing Israel toward an existential threshold. Interesting Engineering's analysis, published during the current conflict, quoted Sanders Zakra of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons directly. A nuclear detonation in a populated area could cause deaths in the hundreds of thousands or even millions, with long-term environmental contamination extending far beyond the immediate strike radius. An exchange of nuclear weapons between even two regional states at the yields typical of current inventories could kill tens of millions of people in the first hours. Nobody in the current conflict has crossed these thresholds. Every analysis of the conflict treats their use as extremely unlikely. Most experts consider it, in the words of Interesting Engineering's assessment, highly unlikely. But here is what every expert assessment also says. It cannot be entirely dismissed. Not in a conflict where the stated goal is regime change, where one side's supreme leader has been killed, where a new leadership has declared an existential conflict, and where the undeclared nuclear arsenal of one party sits 12 kilometers from one of the largest cities in the Middle East. The proliferation lesson and its consequences. Whatever happens in the immediate conflict, ceasefire, prolonged attrition, or negotiated exit, the nuclear lesson of the 2026 Iran war has already been written. Every non-nuclear state watching this conflict is processing the same data. Iran did not have nuclear weapons. Iran's leadership was killed. Iran's military infrastructure is being systematically dismantled. The stated objective of the attacking force includes regime change. The conventional military asymmetry between Iran and the U.S.-Israeli coalition has been demonstrated comprehensively. North Korea noticed. We have already documented Kim Jong Un's missile test on March 10th, the same day THAAD was being redeployed from the Korean peninsula. The Union of Concerned Scientists stated in March 2026 that other governments worried that they may one day suffer the unwelcome attention of the United States, will be unable to trust in diplomatic processes or international institutions, and may choose to pursue security through the rapid development of nuclear weapons. The Arms Control Association was more specific. Another wave of U.S. or Israeli attacks on Iran likely would drive Iranian leaders away from negotiations and strengthen the argument inside Iran that only possessing nuclear weapons can protect the state from external attack. Other nations in the Middle East and beyond will likely draw a similar conclusion, increasing the odds of expanded nuclear proliferation in the years ahead. Saudi Arabia has publicly discussed civilian nuclear development. Turkey has expressed interest in nuclear technology. Egypt has the technical capacity to pursue it. The domino logic of nuclear proliferation, where each new nuclear state creates incentives for neighbors to follow, operates on timelines measured in decades, not months. But the decisions that set those timelines in motion are made in the immediate aftermath of events like this one. The Iran war was launched to prevent nuclear proliferation by one specific state at one specific moment. The long-term effect of the war on global nuclear proliferation, on the number of states that conclude they need their own deterrent to avoid Iran's fate, is the calculation that the next decade will reveal. The numbers behind the phrase, "world will be destroyed." On May 4th, 2025, Donald Trump said of Iran's nuclear program, "I want them to be so successful, and, the Iranian people are incredible. I just don't want them to have a nuclear weapon because the world will be destroyed." He said it again in slightly different formulations, dozens of times, across 2024 and 2025. The White House published a compilation of 74 such statements in March 2026. Nuclear weapons are the greatest danger to our country going forward, to the world going forward. Nuclear weapons are the single greatest threat to this world. The world will be destroyed. These statements are almost always dismissed as Trump hyperbole. And in the specific, immediate context of this conflict, the professional assessment of most analysts is that nuclear use remains extremely unlikely. But the underlying arithmetic that Trump's hyperbole is gesturing at is real. a nuclear exchange in the Middle East between state-level actors with modern warhead inventories, not the crude, improvised devices of a first-generation program, but weapons integrated with ballistic missiles and aircraft, in a region whose urban centers are densely populated and close together, would produce casualties measured in the tens of millions within hours. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, Federation of American Scientists, and multiple academic modeling efforts have estimated that an Iran-Israel nuclear exchange, using even a fraction of Israel's assessed inventory, would kill between 16 and 28 million people. Immediately, with subsequent radiation exposure, displacement, and agricultural disruption, adding tens of millions more across the following years. A broader regional exchange involving Pakistani and Indian programs, which regional nuclear tensions can trigger, produces estimates in the hundreds of millions. These are not predictions. They are the parameters of the scenario that the word nuclear actually describes when applied to conflict at this scale. The phrase, "world will be destroyed," is technically an overstatement and practically a summary of the range of plausible outcomes if the thresholds that have held since 1945 are crossed. Where the line actually is. Nobody in this conflict has stated a nuclear red line. No government has said, if X happens, we will use nuclear weapons. The strategic ambiguity that has governed nuclear posture since Hiroshima and Nagasaki is designed to prevent that specificity, because named thresholds invite testing. But the structure of the current conflict contains pressure points that analysts identify as potential trigger sequences. The most commonly cited, a successful Iranian strike on Dimona, dispersing radioactive material across Israel's population centers, killing tens of thousands through radiation exposure. Does that constitute an attack requiring the most extreme response in Israel's arsenal? Nobody knows. That uncertainty is itself a deterrent and a risk. The discovery that Iran has successfully built and concealed a nuclear device, using the 400 kilograms of enriched uranium whose location is currently unknown. Does that change the calculations of every actor in the conflict? Yes. Does it create pressure for preemptive use before that device can be delivered? The history of nuclear strategy says it might. The collapse of the Iranian state into ungoverned space, with nuclear materials unaccounted for and potentially accessible to non-state actors. The Arms Control Association warned explicitly that internal instability creates increased risk that nuclear materials will be stolen or diverted to undeclared sites, including the possibility that Iranian nuclear scientists may be willing to sell their expertise to state or non-state nuclear weapons aspirants. None of these scenarios are likely in the short term. All of them are more likely today than they were on February 27, 2026, the day before Operation Epic Fury began. The war was launched to prevent the scenario Trump described as the one in which the world would be destroyed. Whether it has made that scenario more or less probable is a question that the current participants are not positioned to answer honestly, because answering it honestly would require acknowledging the limits of what force alone can accomplish against the physics and the logic of nuclear weapons. The 400 kilograms is still out there. The IAEA cannot see it. The engineers who know what to do with it are alive. The motivation to use that knowledge has never been stronger. And the war that was supposed to solve this is still being fought.